Hello, happy late August, almost fall. Don't let the nice light in the sweater fool you. It is still 80 degrees out, but I'm ready for fall. So I figured, let's make a fall inspiration video so that at least I can pretend. And what is more inspiring than the TV show Gilmore Girls for those feelings of early to late fall with the falling leaves and the nice sweaters. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm gonna be discussing, I have, I think 43 patterns on my list that we're gonna go through really quickly with, you know, a couple different inspiration sources. So yeah, if you don't know the TV show Gilmore Girls, it takes place in a town called Stars Hollow in the northeast of the United States. And it follows this mother-daughter duo, Lorelei and Rory, as Lorelei works at an inn and Rory is at first attending high school and then ends up going to Harvard. So you follow her through her school and then her mom through her life in Stars Hollow with all of their great friends. So this show just has such great fall vibes, partially because of when I watched it for the first time, but also it is very quintessential of a northeast fall with the beautiful red leaves that fall down and the town square and lots of coffee and hot drinks featured. And I watched it for the first time in the fall of 2020. I had just moved into my first solo apartment. I was living in a little studio, and about every night or every other night, my mom and I from our separate houses would watch an episode of Gilmore Girls together and text throughout it. So this show has always brought me such a sense of comfort and this coziness as I, you know, got used to living alone and being able to still connect to my mom and watching this mother-daughter show together. So I will always love Gilmore Girls and get excited about just the vibe of the show, and the opening intro is by Carole King, and that song always just makes me so comforted and excited about fall. So let's get into some fall inspiration from Gilmore Girls. All right, the first thing I wanted to discuss is the color palette. I think that the colors of Gilmore Girls, they have a very distinctive color palette in a lot of their clothes and the ambiance. And if you want to knit things that really feel inspired by Gilmore Girls, I think the colors will really help you do that. So I've made a bit of a color scheme that I will put on the screen now. There's definitely a lot of some jewel tones, and then some, I don't know how to describe the neutrals in the palette. They're cool browns, but brown's a warm color, so they're kind of these really, you know, normal or mid-tone neutrals where they're not super warm, but it's obviously not grays. It's still browns, but it's kind of a cooler brown. A lot of people have described some of the colors as like a coffee brown, which I think is a really apt description, especially given how much coffee features in the show. So yeah, this is some great color inspo. I think it's a little bit different than the colors a lot of knitters have been talking about for this fall. You know, High Fiber Knits is talking about tomato soup core, and petrichor as well. So definitely a different palette, but I like these colors a lot, and think that knitting any of the following patterns in them would really give you the Gilmore Girls vibe. So let's get into some patterns. The first I've kind of broken up. I have, let's see, 11 different kind of categories of pattern to discuss. And broken them up by who kind of inspired them. So the first is a Lorelei inspired category, which is a chunky or more oversized than chunky textured turtleneck. And these turtlenecks are mostly lightly textured, so I'll pop some images up of her in some turtlenecks. You know, they have ribbing or light cabling, just not too much patterning on them. I think some of them might have broken rib, but overall, like, very light texture on the turtleneck, and they're oversized. And so yeah, the patterns I came up with for this inspiration, and I have my notebook right here. First is the caramel sweater. This is by Petite Knit. The second is Paloma, which I will pop up images of them all with the designer's name. I also have a Ravelry bundle linked below where you can find all of these, so I'm not going to be saying every single designer's name because there are 44 patterns to go through. But the Paloma sweater, it's beautiful. The olive turtleneck as well is really great. This one's a little bit more textured than the other ones. It's kind of a lace motif as well. So if you wanted kind of a step up from some of Lorelei's, I think this would be a great idea. It's also such a beautiful sweater. And then finally the Busan sweater, which has definitely been making its rounds on knitting Instagram, and some YouTubers have also talked about it. It is so beautiful with that big cable down the front, and it's super oversized. So yeah, the sample is knitted in this bright orange, but I think if you did it in like a plum or periwinkle, it would just be so beautiful and so reminiscent of some of Lorelei's outfits. So though that is the first category, the next one that we'll talk through is colorwork hats. So both Rory and Lorelei wear a lot of these little colorwork hats. They typically don't have a brim. It's just like, you know, a little hat, no bauble either. It's just straight hat. I don't know if that's a very early 2000s style, probably. And I found a few. They're typically also like very small colorwork motifs, so it goes throughout, but they're not like big colorwork motifs. There's a lot of almost lines. It's kind of ferile. So the ones that I am choosing to highlight, and there will be more in the bundle, are the Anthology hat, the Alpine Bloom hat, which High Fiber Knits also just discussed, the Sea Glass hat, and the Strata hat. So all four of these are really beautiful. They have that kind of smaller and all over colorwork motif. The Anthology, you can customize and choose what motifs you go on it. It's kind of like the Strange Brew by Tin Can Knits as well, where, you know, it's a pattern with a lot of different options for what you want to put as the colorwork motifs. So all four of those patterns would really get to that colorwork motif. They're also a little bit more modernized. I think a couple of them have brims, so that helps. At least for me, I feel like I wouldn't want to wear a brimless hat. So those give a little bit more of a modern vibe, but they also still have the core of the Gilmore Girls kind of look from that earlier time. The next thing is we're kind of in our Rory inspiration now. Rory wears a ton of knitwear, which makes sense. I mean, a lot of these are about Rory because she is like the Harvard student and the younger girl, so she wears a lot more outfits overall, and a lot of them are knitwear based on her, you know, character. So the first thing is a textured hoodie. She wears a fair amount of knit hoodies on the show. I'll insert some pictures, and I was struggling to find an exact match to them. The closest I could find is the Central Park hoodie, so it's like this open hoodie with the cables. I think it's like a different style than what I personally like. That's featured on the show, but this is a very close match if you are into it. And I think it can be styled very nicely. It just reminds me too much of, you know, Hollister back in the day. So that's my aversion to it, but it's still like a beautiful piece. Some more modern versions I found that I like a little bit more are the Everything Nice hoodie, which is really nice with the nice details for cabling, the Charleston tee, which has a beautiful, you know, detailed piece on the back, and then the Zingabur, I think that's how you would pronounce it. So check those out. Again, I'll have pictures, and then there's the bundle below. But yeah, they're all really beautiful. We'll see if I ever make anything from this list, but very nice. The next thing is a textured cardigan. I think Rory is like, she wears a ton of very textured knits, which I love. So she wears this specific textured cardigan, which will be on the screen now. And on my search for something similar, I think None of these are super similar. They're kind of, again, like a more modernized version because Rory's is like a fully button up, and again, reminds me kind of Hollister or American Eagle back in 2007 or 2006. So the ones I was able to find that are similar and more modern, first of all, is the Athens cardigan V-neck, which it's very beautiful. I think that the V-neck is always a really nice touch on a cardigan and kind of makes it feel a little bit more modern to me. Let's see how many times in this video I say the word modern. Oh my gosh. Next is the Folklore cardigan. Of course, you have to feature it. It's the Taylor Swift inspired cardigan, but it's also very reminiscent of this cardigan from Rory. You know, it's got the cable details and some of even the cross details right on the front panels. And I think too, if you just omitted the little stripe around the edge, it would look a lot more like Rory's cardigan than it would the Folklore cardigan. The next one is the Sarah cardigan. This one's beautiful. It's S-E-R-A. Yeah, it's beautiful. And then finally the Archetype, which is also a wonderful cardigan. I honestly think one of these three or four will end up on my knit list. I love a cardigan, and doing something with more texture would just be wonderful. So we'll see if one of these ends up in my queue, which I think my queue is public, so you can see it if you are ever curious about what I'm planning to knit. We'll see. One of these might end up on there. I don't know which one yet. The next thing, again inspired by Rory, is a colorwork yoke. So she wears this specific sweater, which is very triangular, I'd say. It's got a lot of points on it, and it's definitely a circular yoke, and then it goes down into green. If you look at it, it's very clearly machine made. It's a very, very tight gauge and looks like it's almost knit with like sewing thread. But I think that you can still kind of take the vibe of this colorwork yoke and find some hand knit patterns. So the ones I chose to highlight for this, and again, there's more in the bundle, but could not highlight, I think there's like 80 patterns in there, so could not highlight them all here. Then very much struggled to narrow it down to still 40-ish patterns, so oh my gosh, this was a lot. But the first is the Pink Velvet sweater. This is so beautiful. I love the colors of the sample as well. I'm such a sucker for pink, so it's beautiful, by Andrew Mowry. The Strange Brew, which I talked about a little bit ago with the anthology hat, it's also by Tin Can Knits, and you can kind of choose what colorwork motifs go into it. So that's very helpful. They have a list of them. You could also make your own. So I think this is, if you're really trying to go as close as possible to Rory's sweater, this would be a great pattern for that, because you can customize the colorwork to really make it match. And I think there's some similar motifs included in the pattern that you could draw from. You might have to make your own. I'm not totally sure, but yeah, it's a great pattern, very popular. The next is the Twinkle sweater, which is very sweet. It's wonderful. I think it's pretty close in the angularness of it to Rory's sweater as well. And then the last I'll highlight is the Sheep Campy sweater. I loved the name of this, and I like the oversized fit. And it does kind of give a different vibe where you feel like you're a little farmer in this sweater. So yeah, I love those. We'll see if one of these ends up on my list. The Pink Velvet kind of really shocked, like, it's beautiful. I've never wanted to do a circular yoke color work before, but I don't know. The Pink Velvet, it might just be the color choices. So beautiful. Oh my gosh. All right, the next thing, I think if you think of knitwear from Gilmore Girls and you've seen anything at all, it would be this sweater. So I'll insert a picture. Rory wears it in the first episode of the TV show, and in that episode, Lorelei actually calls it her MooMoo. So it's a super oversized, white, super textured, chunky sweater. So it goes, you know, past her butt. She has to cuff the sleeves like 3 or 4 times, and it's just, it's got so much texture on it. It's beautiful. It's definitely like a very iconic knitwear piece. I've seen a couple knitwear designers try to recreate it, or you know, videos. I saw a video of someone trying to make it themselves, so it's a very iconic piece. And so the patterns I've chosen to highlight for this are first the Eclair Raglan. This is by Laura Penrose, and I think it's a really beautiful design. There's options to do a turtleneck or not, and I think, you know, with the non-turtleneck and maybe leaving out the baubles, it would really give that oversized, and the pattern's knit and cream, so that might be influencing this, but the oversized creamy textured jumper, but feeling a little bit more modern as well, because it's not, none of these are going to be as oversized as Rory's. I mean, I guess you could make any of them as oversized as Rory's by just going up a few sizes, but I think that I would rather have it be very positive eased garment, but still, you know, fit my arms and not go over my butt, because that's so much knitting as well for, you know, just a super big sweater. But the Eclair Raglan, very beautiful. And I know that Laura always includes a lot of modifications in her pattern, so it'd be very easy to change the neckline and omit the baubles. Or you could do it with the baubles, because the baubles are very cute as well. They just don't lean as much towards the Rory sweater. So the next sweater is the Moby sweater. Of course, you have to include that if you're talking about oversized, very textured knits. So it's even got a panel of cross hatching. So one of the key features of Rory's sweater is these big cross hatches. This one has a lot smaller cross hatches, but it still features that, you know, the little X's in the design. So I think that pulls nicely from it and gives a good, like, inspired by, not copying. So that'd be nice. And then sweater number 20, I mean, it's so textured. There's so many different kinds of cables. It is a V-neck, so it's a little bit different, but it is meant to be an oversized fit, and it is textured. So that would be a great option as well. And then finally is the Gemma. I think it's Gemma, it's G-E-M-A. So I believe it's Gemma, which is also so beautiful, super oversized. Oh my gosh, super oversized, super textured, wonderful knit as well. This might end up on my queue, I'm not sure yet. My queue is kind of huge right now, but it's so beautiful. All right, next Rory inspired piece, and this is our last Rory inspiration, is a lightweight long sleeve semi-textured piece. So she specifically wears this one, it might be crocheted, but she wears this one very open knit cardigan wrap thing to a dinner. I don't know what episode, but a dinner with Emily and Richard Gilmore. That's the grandparents of the show, and they're very fancy. So she's wearing this certain cardigan. It looks kind of like it's a wrap, and it's got some nice texture to it. So I couldn't find something that fully encompassed both the like wrap detail with the texture. So I've chosen to highlight the Nora wrap, which is kind of a nice, very light, I think it's probably fingering or lace weight cardigan with a wrap waist. So, you know, you knit I-cords and wrap it around. I think that one's really beautiful, honestly. And then the lacework Uno, which this designer I've never seen her knit from her, but this piece is really beautiful and I think nicely pulls from that inspiration. So this would be a great piece if you're really loving the lacework on Rory's sweater. And then the next one, does not have the lace detail or the wrap detail, but I still thought it fit nicely with the little frills at the collar and the sleeves. And this is the Bmine Blouse. I love this knit. It's been on my list for a while to make. So it's a very tight gauge, very lightweight, or not, yeah, a very lightweight, maybe fingering, I think. And then it's got the little, you know, frills at the collar, frills at the sleeves, and the nice balloon sleeves. Very classy. I think, you know, it's not meeting the description I gave for this knit at the beginning, but somehow it still gives a similar vibe to me, where I think it's very girly. And part of what I love about this shirt that Rory wears is it's so dainty and girly. And so I think the Bmine Blouse really pulls from that. as well. And I can see Rory wearing it. So I'm really trying to justify including this pattern because I just love this pattern, and I thought I really gave Gilmore Girl vibes, but I just could not figure out where to include it. So it's being shoved in here, but it's beautiful. And then the final pattern for this category of a lightweight semi-textured long sleeve is the Winsome Pullover. Also a very wonderful lace, all over lace sweater that, you know, it's beautiful, has that texture that Rory's knit has as well. It just doesn't have the wrap detail, but very beautiful. And again, a designer I'd never heard of. All right, we're nearing the end here, guys. So now we're moving on to new people to be inspired by. So the first person is Miss Patty, who is the dance teacher in Stars Hollow and is just such a kind of matriarch of the Stars Hollow community. And she's such a character in herself. And she constantly has, you know, these flowy shawls. She's always wearing oversized things and has these big flowy shawls on. And so I've kind of chosen to just highlight some shawls for Miss Patty that I think she would want to wear. The first is the pressed flower shawl, which, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. I'd seen a lot of people knitting the pressed flowers sweater, but hadn't seen the pressed flowers shawl highlighted. And I think I like the shawl more than the sweater. I mean, the sweater is also beautiful, but the pressed flower shawl, I think, is just really a great place for creativity to flow because, you know, it's an accessory, not your whole garment. So that may make its way onto my list, but I can also really see Miss Patty wearing it. The next is the Find Your Fade shawl. I think this is really nice and has like such wonderful color details. So, you know, the fade in the shawl is just wonderful. Could definitely see Miss Patty wearing it. Next, the silver leaf shawl. I love the lace work in this shawl. I think it's beautiful and just gives like such a daintiness to it and still is like nice and oversized and just chef's kiss. And then finally, on this list, it's the Sophie Shawl. This is by Petite Knit. I've knit one myself. I think for Miss Patty, making the larger size and just the dramatic, like the way, if you've seen a Sophie scarf, the way the shawl is structured is the same. So it's very long, pointy, and then comes down to a little bit of a point, and it's got I-cord edges and it's all garter. And I can just see like mine's super oversized and has these like little long bits at the end, and I can just see Miss Patty like dramatically throwing the edge of the shawl up. So chose to include that in the list. The next person that has inspired some knitwear is Suki. So she is Lorelei's best friend and the cook at the inn they work at, and then becomes the co-owner of the inn that Lorelei and Suki own and continues to be the chef. And Suki's dress wear is so fun. Her outfits when she's not in, you know, her work uniform of, you know, a chef's coat are so fun. She definitely wears, I think, the most color in the show, which I love. And especially a lot of pink and purple and some lighter blues and lighter greens. So yeah, she's very pastel and very, very fun colors. So I've chosen to highlight some slubby pieces for her. I can just really see her, the things she does wear are very like funky and fun. Sometimes like distressed or just super textured, but not in the same way as like cables or lace work, but more just the item itself has texture. So I've chosen to highlight the teddy vest, which is knit in boucle or slub yarn. The flutter sweater, which I love. It's got, you know, mohair band and then like a band of slub, which is actually very similar to the Nolani, I think it's Nolani shawl, which my mom is actually knitting right now. And I'll insert a picture. It's very similar to the flutter sweater in that, you know, it uses a couple bands of slub, and then there's bands of mohair, or you could also just use a fingering weight simple yarn to make this like very nice texture where it's got this beautiful slub and then it's just the mohair, which is so light and delicate. So those both really scream Suki to me. I don't really know why I chose Slub to highlight Suki, but I think, you know, the bright colors you can experiment with there and just the fun texture it gives is so wonderful. So yeah, that's my Suki. Inspo. And then for Paris, I chose all things cardigans. Paris is one of Rory's best friends. She's her college roommate and they just continue to be friends. She's such a character. I think Paris is one of my favorite characters on the show, honestly. She's so funny. So yeah, or no, she's her college roommate, but they meet each other in high school. So Paris is there throughout almost the entire show. And at first Rory kind of hates her. She's very, very forward and driven and kind of sometimes says things that she shouldn't. She's just very, what is the word? Very blunt. And, you know, kind of overdriven where, you know, she'll put other people down to get the academic progress she's looking for. So I don't know, something about her though is just very endearing over time. So I've chosen to highlight the Whitmore cardigan for Paris. I've seen Knee Knits, Amy of Knee Knits making this, and it's so beautiful. All of these cardigans are very lightweight. They're all kind of fingering, I think DK to fingering weight. So very light, so very close to the body, very fitted as well. Paris, you know, is very, very Northeast wealthy, or kind of shows some old money. And I think the very fitted cardigan leans to that. So the Whitmore cardigan is the first one. The Copenhagen cardigan, which I love, it's a fully straight cardigan, but very, very little texture. And then Walk the Cumbria Way. This is more of a jacket almost. It's open, but it's very cleanly finished. And I can definitely see Paris wearing this. And then finally is the April cardigan, which I've actually already knit, and it's a V-neck. I think especially if you made the modification for the double knit, for just such a clean fitted cardigan, with especially the shoulder details are very fancy. It's kind of, I think the construction is called a saddle shoulder, so it very nicely hugs your shoulder as it goes down. So yeah, those are my Paris inspired cardigan. The final group of patterns that I want to highlight are all inspired by Emily and Richard, who are Lorelei's parents and Rory's grandparents. They live in one of the bigger cities of the Northeast. I should have looked up exactly which one before. If I'm being honest, the geography of the Northeast has always confused me. I live out in Colorado, which it takes, you know, 7 hours to drive to the southern border of my state, or I can stay in Colorado driving for like 8 or so hours. So I never quite know what states things in the Northeast are in, because everything just seems so close together, similar to Europe to me, where I'm like, you can drive to a new country in an hour. I'm stuck in my state for 7. So anyways, I'm not quite sure which city, but they live in one of the bigger cities. And I think I want to say it's like the capital of Connecticut that they live in. Don't quote me. But they are very much kind of old money. They're wealthy. Richard works at an insurance company. And I think he's one of the owners of the company. Emily is, you know, a very typical housewife. She is constantly shopping at department stores, constantly participating in the PTA or certain galas and hosting big events at their house. So it's very old money inspired. So these 4 patterns that I'm going to mention all kind of draw from that aesthetic. So the first is a Richard inspired pattern, which is the Macri Hanish. It's a sweater vest, and it's kind of all over colorwork sweater vest. This reminds me a lot of this episode where Richard takes Rory golfing and he's wearing this, you know, little sweater vest like that. So that is my Richard piece. And then we'll move on to the fun Emily inspired pieces. So these pieces all draw from Emily's constantly wearing kind of Chanel suits. She wears a lot of Chanel. I don't know if they're actually Chanel, but they look very much like those Chanel suits. So the first cardigan or jacket is the big check jacket. It's just all three of these are very structured, slightly textured knits. So this is a very nice jacket that I think draws well from that, I'm gonna keep saying Chanel suit vibe. The next is the Focus on Lines, which also draws very heavily from Chanel suits. I think you don't see Emily a lot without like that kind of Chanel suit or some structured jacket on top of her outfits. So yeah, that's the Focus on Lines, and I really like that it highlights the seams. You know, a lot of the times in knitwear you're trying to make things look as seamless as possible, or I personally hate seaming garments, so I'm constantly trying to knit with as few seams and as few pickup edges as well as possible, whereas this piece is really highlighting those, which I really like. And then finally is the Verena jacket, which again has this very nice fit, very structured, very Chanel suit vibes. So yeah, those are my last patterns. Thank you for listening through as I talk through all of these patterns. I hope some of them inspired you. There is infinite knitting inspiration in Gilmore Girls, so I'm sorry if I didn't highlight your favorite character or, you know, your favorite knitwear piece throughout the show. There's so many. I know that Lane also wears some really great pieces. Kirk has some really nice sweaters. Jackson, Suki's wife, always has a nice little cap, which I could have highlighted as well. But I kind of chose what inspired me the most and what I thought would be most popular. So, you know, I hope that these pieces inspired you, and they've definitely inspired me. I'm so ready to cast on something for the fall, and after making this video, I very much feel like I want to make one of the really textured pieces that Rory wears, so we'll see. Or a turtleneck. Oh my gosh, I kind of might do a turtleneck for Lorelei. We'll see. But oh my gosh, thank you for watching. Again, hope you found some inspiration, and you know, let's all just will fall into existence together. So I probably pretty soon after this, I'm gonna cast on a fall knit. I hope you do as well, and let's start our Gilmore Girls fall. All right, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, and happy knitting. Bye.